sex addiction is that way of coping because you can't ever be enough. You can't ever be perfect enough. When you're finding your worth and achievement, when do you reach it? When is it enough?
What is that connecting of the dots for you? That big realization that you feel like makes a sex addict transition into that different phase, if you will, the next phase, recovery phase, where sobriety and recovery, gets easier, sure, but it's more fun. There's more investment. It's motivating. What is that realization, that shift?
Well, for me, I think it's accountability. Okay. And I noticed in your video clip there that you had accountability as one of those 3 characteristics there. When you cross over into understanding that accountability is protection and not restriction, when I see a huge shift in the clientele that I see them become more humble. They're more invested in learning. They're more invested in empathy. They're more invested in doing the work for themselves. But that is the one key that I see, because everybody that comes in my door, at least from my experience, they've lived an unaccountable life, right? They're usually the big guy on campus, so to speak. And so they do what they want. People have a hard time saying no to them. They go where they want, and when you're living that double life, especially, of course, it's so harmful to you, but it really feeds that non-accountable living. And so when I see a huge change, and I also educate the partners on this too, when they cross over into seeing accountability being for them, not against them, right? They're not being restricted. I see like really good progress take place.
You're, oh my gosh, I love that. I haven't heard that approach before, but it is true. It's this, there's this concept of like, oh, you can't recover for anyone but you. And so it's like, when you hear the word accountability, I think that's, your first instinct is, well, that would be about other people. That would be, I have some sort of metrics, or, I'm reporting to someone else. But I like the way that you phrased it. It's the shift from I'm putting these in place. And I think in the beginning, a lot of it is, the therapist is suggesting, the couples therapist or the individual therapist is suggesting things put into place, barriers. And that can feel, to your point, that can feel intrusive, like you're losing freedoms, which, for the people in my group and a lot of the men you work with, losing freedom is, that's a high achievers. That's something they don't like. Don't tell me what to do. A lot of what's made them this way is hey, don't tell me what to do. I got this. I'm doing this on my own. I'm really good at getting what I want. And so this concept of another person telling you how to live, but you bring up a good point. It's the pivot from, hey, I'm putting these things in place to hold myself accountable so that I can become the man I want to be.
It's so true. I have one client that came to mind as you were talking, and I could give many examples, but he's a professional athlete, and he came in my office and he had his gallon of water, because he drinks a gallon of water every day. And he sat down and he was telling me what was going on in his life and all the things that are wrong with his wife. And I said, well, you sound like you're a sex addict, right? You're what you're telling me, right? You came to see me because of my credentials. And he said, I don't think I am. Yeah. He left. I didn't see him for a month. He came back, sat down, had his gallon of water again. And he was telling me more information. And of course, we laugh about this now. He came in, he was telling me more information, about who he is. And, and I said, well, you're a sex addict, right? And it was the 3rd time that he came that he said, okay, get me on your schedule. I need to do some work, right? But we laugh about that. And we've talked about that he said, I don't like being told anything, right? And so, it was really hard for him, but he realized he was living outside of his integrity. what he was doing, but he didn't want to be labeled as a sex addict. He didn't want to believe that it was something that was out of his control, because he's a very disciplined, high achiever. But when you realize that, you are going to be told some things, and it's to help you, not to hurt you, and you can lean into making those changes. And then you see just so much good come. And he's walking in his integrity today and doing really well. But every once in a while, we'll still laugh about that when he first came in, So
it's I mean, there's a couple different reasons for it. So I don't want to assume that everyone listening to this falls into this category, but I'll speak for myself. And I know just through experience, I'm speaking on behalf, at least of the clients in my group, almost 70% of them. I couldn't have any problems. I couldn't handle any more, is what I should say. I couldn't have another problem. And it was funny when this addiction came into my reality of, oh my gosh, I actually am an addict. It's like, I think every addict comes in as like, oh, sex addict, that's not me. That's for perverts. That's for child. I'm not one of those. And then I'm reading the book and I'm like, huh. That kind of sounds like me. And then you start retracing your steps and you're like, wow, this actually starting to add up. But I think really though, the barrier wasn't, so that was barrier one, obviously, is okay, this actually is an addiction. I can see the patterns. But then there's another barrier. And again, I don't want to speak for every man. But for me, I couldn't, and I know this sounds so childish, but I couldn't have another problem. I just really was like, I can't, at least not of this magnitude. I can't have an addiction. I can't handle I'm reading the papers about the parents and the lack of attunement, and households that are very, very restrictive, households where you're praised for being excellent and getting good grades, and all these things being a recipe for an addict, a sex addict. I was thinking, oh my gosh, no, I can't handle this. And you know where that came from when I was really sitting there? Because come on, I'm not an idiot. So I'm thinking, oh, come on, Roland, who can't have problems? But you know what the answer to that question is somebody who already has too many. They can't handle one more. And that was probably like the realization was, yes, we have this addiction and this, this really big thing that must be faced, and I'm the one that has to face it. But I think the big epiphany for me, kind of pre-step one, if you will, was that moment of, man, what kind of person can't handle another problem? Well, somebody who already is dealing with enough of the worst of the worst of the worst problems, which in my case was, again, another problem that I didn't know I had, which was I'm already insignificant at rest. I have to do all of these things. And so the idea of having another thing on top of managing my money perfectly, managing my businesses perfectly, managing my image perfectly, my six pack, there's so many of these things I had to manage every single day to be perfect, and things I had to hide, obviously. And so the idea of having this addiction, which the more I looked at it, it was very overwhelming to look at, because I'm not an idiot. I looked at it and I was like, okay, wow, this is going to be a lot of work. I simply did not want to inherit one more problem. I'm curious to get your thought on that. Do you see that? Is there, the point where they're actually willing to admit that they have an addiction, but then again, stomaching the reality of the situation and the things that they're going to need to undo is overwhelming.
Oh, it's very overwhelming. And when you're trying to find your worth and achievement, it's never enough. And so a lot of times, as you know, sex addiction is that way of coping, because you can't ever be enough. You can't ever be perfect enough. When you're finding your worth and achievement, when do you reach it? When is it enough? So then you have this feel good that you're doing as a way to cope with life. And so you're exactly right. If I have to stop being perfect, stop the achieving of the illusion of that, then I've got to really deal with me. And so who am I? What's my worth? then such deeper work has to take place. And, you're usually overachieving, not just to have your own worth, but usually high achievers that come into me, they've got a lot of people that look up to them and are dependent on them.
Yes.
And so they don't get an opportunity to, they're taking care of so many other people and doing so many other things and a lot of good things. But yes, I see it with just about everybody because, the teaching from Patrick Carnes is that really you have a skewed sense of self, right? That if you really knew me, you wouldn't love me. And here you are, this man that everybody looks up to and seems so successful, but really inside, right, you don't stop. That's why you stay busy, right? Because if you have to stop and look at yourself, right, then it's a deeper dive. So that's exactly right. And you explained it. The way you shared that was just really significant.
Well, because I think the challenge with a lot of men listening to this, I already know what they're thinking because I thought this, which was, you read some of the things in the sex edition of literature. It's like, a feeling of worthlessness, essentially, of, you wouldn't love me. And I think it's tough for a lot of high achievers because a lot of their achievement comes from the narcissistic side of the spectrum. And again, when I use that word, I don't mean it in the way that everybody means it. I mean it in a way of, we all are narcissists as kids. And then in the areas that we feel like we're going to get our needs met, we grow out of it. And in the areas that we don't. And so I'm really sad about the word narcissism being used in the derogatory way that it's used, because really for me, those are the areas as a high achiever that need your attention. Why do I not trust the world to take care of this need? Why don't I trust anyone else to take care of this need? In the case of sex addicts, your wife gets clumped into that for a lot of men, right? I don't trust my wife to satisfy this need. It's on me to satisfy it. And then that's going to come in form of whatever it comes: money, sex, affairs. I mean, however, whatever it is that your brain process is telling you of meeting that. But I think I wanted to highlight for everyone listening, you'll hear, and I know high achievers have a hard time hearing this because their first thought is, no, I'm enough. I'm good. I'm good at what I do. Like, I don't think I'm worthless. Here's the way I like to rephrase that for the high achiever to understand that they do in fact believe that. And here's how I prove it. Would you be enough the way you are? If you stopped everything that you did, if you stopped all of it and you'd never improved ever, no more improvement, would you be okay the way? Is that an acceptable way to live your life? And they would all answer, absolutely not. I need to be every day and I go, exactly, because if you're not enough the way you are, which is a fancy way, another way of saying you're inadequate. You're inadequate, right? You have this sense of, and a lot of people do. They have a hard time with that. And it's like, look, I'm just saying, if you look at your daily practices, you're not enough without doing more, which is another way of saying you're not enough the way you are. But it's a hard concept to understand. And if you can let that in, I feel like you will, the word I like to call it is humility. Just re-injecting that humanity that, you're human just like everyone else. Here's the other way that I get to the core of a high achiever. I'll ask them, would you wish this upon your kids? Would you wish this nonstop pressure, this constant, this thing that you wear as a badge of honor? Would you wish this upon your kid? And a lot of high achievers think, oh God, no. I pray that they don't inherit this lifelong stress and burden. But the irony is, what about you? You know what? I mean, you're a human too. You were once a child, and there's just this seems to be this, I'd love for you to speak to it, but it seems just to be this disconnect between the fact that you were once a kid too, who felt exactly that way. And that this burden was, you agreed to it at some point in time. I don't know who told you, if your parents, your mentors, you learned it on TV, but a lot of this pressure that high achievers live under is self-imposed. It's self-imposed. And I think by the time they make it into my group or your office, it can be really hard to undo a lot of that. I mean, you've got kids in private schools that have a certain price tag. You have You know what? So I guess, you know, when someone comes in to your office and they're under this level of pressure, where do you begin?
Well, you know, it takes a little bit of time to really take a look at dividing or separating, I should say, who you are from what you do,
Hmm.
right? So you have to start looking at your worth. I always say, you know, when we really grasp a hold of the fact that we are uniquely, divinely created by God, there's only one of us. Right, nobody else can be us, but we spend our lives trying to be somebody else, right? We spend our lives trying to achieve enough, be enough, keep up with everyone, and social, you know, the social media, the internet, it's on a global now. You know, it used to be the neighborhood and the school, right? In the town, and now it's global. So I think there's so much pressure as well.
Hmm.
Um, and so I really think when you start to take that deep dive, as I see so many of the clients that I see take that deep dive, um, you know, it's such a precious time because you start to take a look at what are all of the characteristics in who you are.
Hmm.
So you're right. When you ask them, as I do, let's take away everything that you do and everything that you achieved, although that is remarkable and should be praised for that. You've done some really great things. But let's take away, and who are you? What's important to you? I always do an exercise with everyone where I say, let's list out what your values are, right? Do you value kindness, generosity, right? Do you value honesty? So a lot of people will say, you know, they know what their values are, but when I ask them, can you tell me what they are? They go,
Yeah.
mm. And so then once we start with that value system, now I say, living out your values is who you are. Right. And so whenever I do a recovery plan for somebody who comes into me with sex addiction, what I do is I don't even call it a recovery plan. I call it an intentional living plan
Mm.
because I want you to focus on walking in integrity.
Hmm.
I want you to focus on let's identify what your values are. Who do you want to be? Not what you want to achieve, because you're already good at that. But let's talk about who do you want to be? And once we identify those, then we can take the time to say,
Hmm.
okay, what areas of my life do I need to work on being more honest? Because I'm a believer, you know, some people will say, oh, if you're dishonest in one area, you're in all areas. Or if you don't have integrity here, you're just not integrous anywhere. I don't believe that.
Hmm.
I believe that, you know, we're master compartmentalizers, and also where we feel safe, where we feel worthy, we can behave differently. So for me, I think that key is let's set aside what you do and what you've done and what you achieve and what everybody else expects from you. And let's just take a look at who you want to be.
Hmm.
And when we start to go there, staying sober and dealing with the recovery issues really becomes so much easier because you're focused on building the person that you are, not what you do. And of course, that's going to entail healthy coping skills.
Hmm.
It's going to entail healthy self care. You know, a lot of high achievers that I see too, um, a lot of things are in extreme,
Yeah.
right? So when you say self care is, you know, let's go to the gym, you know, an hour a day, an hour and a half. They're like, what? I spend 3.5 hours in the gym a day. Why would I go? And, you know, so whatever it may be, even when I look at self care, I laugh because, you know, if they're going to do something, if you're a high achiever and you're going to do something, you're going to do it well.
Hmm.
You're going to do it big. You're going to do it. So a lot of the issue with addiction is really understanding balance,
Hmm.
right? Taking a deep breath. And I don't want you to stop being successful as the way you deem success, but I just want you to broaden that
Hmm.
definition of success. I want you to really take a look at balance. And that doesn't mean that you don't, you know, still do your extreme and whatever it is that you need to do. Um, you know, my husband is a mountain climber, and for the life of me, I'll never ever understand it why you spend a fortune to climb a mountain, stick a little flag up there,
Hmm.
take your picture, and then you risk your life to come back down, by
Yeah.
the way. You know, I just don't get it. But I'm totally supportive of whatever he wants to do when he does it, just I'm not going, right?
Hmm.
But that's something that takes extreme training and dedication and a lot of money. So I'm not saying that you give up what you love or you give up some of that, but really coming back to what you were saying is I think it all starts with identifying your
Mm-hmm.
values.
Mm-hmm.
Who do you want to be? And let's start taking those steps toward living in those values every day. When you do that, you see very clearly that it's much easier to stay sober, to stay healthy, and to value yourself in a healthy way.
Yeah, high achievers abandon self often. Again, I'm speaking generally, but typically I would say if you have developed a sex addiction, porn addiction, affairs, you've usually, I think it's fairly safe to say, you abandon self at some point in time. Usually the men in my group, that abandoning of self happened before the age of 12. A lot of the time it was, and again, by abandoning self, what I'm referring to for everybody listening is, high achievers, I believe, are hardwired to make an impact and influence other people. It's in their hardwiring. We are hyper aware of what other people consider success, what other people consider difficult, what other people consider rare. We're hyper aware of it. You can see these children. You can go back and ask my babysitters. My babysitters, they contact me now and they're like, "Oh, I always knew you'd be super successful." And it's like, it's so weird to think, because I was 6 years old. But again, you have this hard wiring in you to be hyper aware of what is rare, what is impactful, what's difficult, what do people consider meaningful. So I bring all that up to say, if that's on your radar, and we live in a world that definitely, I would say, pours gasoline on that need to be impressive. It definitely, the whole society is definitely biased towards those who achieve. When you put all of those things together, and a high achiever will abandon self in favor of becoming what everyone else considers rare, remarkable, or unusually great. And it's that abandoning of self that you become what everyone wants you to become. And unfortunately, in a capitalist world, that works. Typically, you do get a wonderful woman because you know how to become what she wants you to become. You do have friends. You do have unique business opportunities. You typically make a ton of money, because if you're able to become the thing that everyone wants you to be, then out of the options, you're the option they pick. And so my point of bringing all this up is, it's really difficult as a high achiever to look back and say where you went wrong, because as the world would define it, it's a history of successes. In the case of the high achievers, usually exceptional successes in the top percent. But I think the sad reality oftentimes is there was an abandoning of self from the get-go. And so a lot of people, when high achievers hear the word recovery, it's usually described as like this recovering, like you're returning to self. But I think a lot of high achievers, Crystal, don't know who that self is, because I don't know if they ever were. I mean, in my case, I got rid of myself right around, like, for sure by 9. But I think it started around 4 or 5. I just started getting rid of me and becoming the thing that was going to get me the attention and admiration and respect, and wealth and power that I wanted. But it's really sad to think back, because it's like, well, and the reason I brought all this up is, you said, what is your definition of success? My definition of success, if you were to ask me, is that I am using my unique abilities to make the impact that they were designed to make. And I think the problem with this abandoning of self was, I had no idea what my unique abilities were, or what I really felt called to do, because I was so concerned with what other people considered rare and admirable. And so I did not feel, and I think a lot of people listening would resonate with this, I did not feel successful, despite all the things happened for me, but there was no success there. And I think that was, at least for me, it was that realization that I knew I was off track. And it was at that point when my sex addiction got really, 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 really bad. I say in our group, the number one cause of worsening sex and porn addiction is futility. For high achievers, a sense of futility is a very triggering. Do you find a similar pattern where there's this, you've become so much that you've become everything you aren't?
Well, a couple of things about what you said there, right? It's never enough. And when you don't know who you are, excuse me, when you don't know who you are and what your values are, you can't ever enjoy the success anyway in a healthy way. So it doesn't matter how much you get.
Right.
And, you're this little boy, like so many that I see, they're not guided and nurtured, and they're not taught who they are is what matters. You're taught at a very young age also to achieve, and you have this great personality that you can do it. You are good at things. And what I see in my practice is when men actually stop spending so much time, and of course I see women, high achievers too, when they stop spending so much time in addiction, it's amazing how all that wasted time, they're actually more successful, but they're successful, like I said earlier, they broaden that definition of what success is. They're happier, they're more joyful. They can go ahead, they can take a day off. I'm not going to say they don't do anything on their days off. They're usually surfing or doing something, right? But they're able to really breathe and start to know who they are. And I think you explained that so well, right? You talk about being 12 and you left, your sense of self, didn't know who your sense of self was. I think that's the most important thing that we do. And I call it intentional living. I call it about walking in integrity. You have to really understand what integrity is. And integrity is what you say and what you do are the same thing. So it aligns with your values. When you do that, that's when you have joy and real success. That's when you understand your own self-worth and value. And from my perspective, that's really when you value other people. When you really start to value yourself and treat yourself differently, making different decisions, knowing what you believe and being able to stand up for that and seek that and pursue that, that's when you can really value other people well. I literally, I'm going to use the word hate. I hate to hear people all the time. It's on the internet. I have people tell me, I have therapists that this, that people are narcissistic and they can't ever change and they're this and they're that. I hate that type of talk because I, like you, see that narcissist, when we look at it in the DSM from a professional standpoint, right, it's because their sense of self has been harmed or not developed. When they start to develop their sense of self, those narcissistic patterns start to dissipate. I always tell everybody, our greatest asset can be our greatest weakness if we're not careful. I am super duper organized, right? So you can ask my husband, he loves our homes because I make them beautiful and everything has a place. But when you have to live with me sometimes, he gets a little nervous. If I'm like, I'm going to go out, and clean this, whatever, he'll go, let me go look at it first, because he's afraid I'm going to throw something away or, so my girlfriends always tease me like, where's your stuff? And I'm like, it's put away. It's where it's supposed to be. So we all can have our greatest strengths be one of our greatest weaknesses if we're not careful. But when you start to really know what your value system is and you're living in it, you're walking in it, things really do start to change and you get that healthy, balanced living. You start to feel a little bit more, right? When you're achieving, you're running on adrenaline, right? You're running on a lot of things. And when you're a sex addict, that's your unhealthy way of coping. Let me give you this example. Paula Hall is a CSAT, and she's in London, and she did a little YouTube video called The Road to Brighton.
Yeah, I've seen it before.
Have you seen it? Yeah. Right? She does such a great job of understanding.
My favorite thing that she says is, it'll never quite, I can't remember where the other one is that she takes us to, but she's like, it'll never quite be, it might not feel quite as good as Brighton did. She acknowledges that, and I always tell everybody the same thing. Hey, sex is a peak experience. A novel sexual experience is a peak experience. And there's not a ton of things in life that can rival a high like that. But here's my argument for that is, so is heroin. And you see a lot of people not using it electively. And so that's what, because I do have a lot of guys who are like, oh, well, I like sex, and my wife, we need to become poly, we need to have an open relationship sexually and all this. There's this argument for, oh, it feels good, and if it wasn't right, it wouldn't feel good. And I always just say, so does heroin. So does heroin. You don't see me and you using that or convincing our wives that it's okay for that. It's I think Rob Wise says, I've heard him on multiple podcasts say, your dick's not going to fall off if you don't have sex for 3 months. And it's so true. It's like, these guys get so caught up on whatever the story is, and they forget that there was once a time where you did not have sex, and there's plenty of people who don't, and they survive just fine. But I like her route there. I thought that analogy was really great for recovery.
Yeah. And, I say to my men, listen, it goes up, it goes down, and you don't die.
Yeah.
Right. And so same thing. And Rob and I have talked about this. But Paula's example that she's giving there is when you're living in that unhealthy, addictive state, you are living in that high. And Brighton is the city in London where everything is happening. It's like our Las Vegas. But once you get sober, you're going to live in the countryside, and you're going to have, and it's going to be wonderful, but it's never going to be Brighton again. Yeah. You're not going to live in that same state all the time. But what you're going to have is so fulfilling and beautiful and healthy. But no, you have to leave that addictive state of living and get that, again, I call it balance. Just getting that balance so that you can, be your best self and widen again that.
Junkies chase highs. Come on, you don't want to be again, it's no one's arguing that it doesn't feel great. No one's trying to change that. The argument is just how just like a junkie of a substance junkie, process junkie is really not that much better. And again, with process addictions, for everybody listening, we focus on sex addiction because of how disruptive that particular process addiction is. But if you look at a lot of high achievers, their process addictions do not stop at sexually compulsive behaviors. I mean, they have, most of them use money as their primary process addiction. They love the story. They love what it makes them. They love the whole narrative around money. But I mean, shopping, social media. I mean, there's a lot of process addictions that we engage in. Our sexual behaviors are just, arguably very effective because of what we're abusing. We're abusing something that, unlike social media where we're kind of just using our eyeballs to blindly consume. So, sex is, you're getting a combo there. If you're scrolling for the perfect pornographic image, you're getting kind of both. You're getting the brainless, dopaminergic behavior of hunting for the perfect image. And then you're getting it paired with this very biologically intense moment. And so, no one's trying to take away, what it gives you, because it is, I think the reason that this particular addiction has such a low sobriety rate, long-term sobriety rate, which is really sad because of what it does to relationships. But I think the reason it's so low is it's right next to, unlike all these other processes where, money's kind of money. This thing is right next to a biological desire that you can't get rid of. I mean, it's to sustain life. And so here you are messing, they say don't use heroin because of its, I kind of agree to some degree with sex, porn, and affairs. To me, it is not a fire you want to play with because it similar to that high. It's especially affairs, emotional affairs. There's a lot of dopamine. It's almost for the 18 hours you're awake, an affair and thinking about the affair and daydreaming about the affair and texting your affair partner. It is a very intense. You're playing with fire when you're going down that road, because if you are dopamine seeking, man, that an affair partner has got to be one of the bigger dopamine sources there is.
Mm-hmm. It does, but what addiction takes from you is maturity.
Yes.
And so when you mature, you're able to enjoy sex, right, with your partner. You're not deprived of great sex, right? And so what you're deprived of is the addiction.
Yes.
And I don't know if you just watched recently, but I'm not sure if it's Netflix or Hulu. But Bon Jovi just came out. I just watched it, right? It's like, I think there's four parts of it. But it's interesting if you, I don't know him, so I don't know all of his story, but it's interesting. When I listened to him telling his story, he tried all the drugs, the sex, and did all of that for a while too. But it's interesting. He never became an addict. Several of the people in the band did, but he never did. And so he matured. He married a wife that he's been with long term, has raised 4 children, has become a very successful businessman, in addition to being a great musician. I mean, that was my era. So Bon Jovi is like amazing. But when I was listening to his story, I was thinking about it relevant to addiction. And what I see was he could have taken that path to addiction, but because he didn't, he matured much more than some of his other bandmates, right? That got caught up in addiction. He made better decisions in life. He's had better outcomes. He's had the most success. He has given back in so many ways. He has built a legacy. And even when he's interviewed, he talks about, because he's made, I think he's worth 400 or 500 million. And he started with nothing. And so you see him go, and he talks about, playing in a band is what I did. It's not who I am.
Yeah. Yes.
And I think he just, when he spoke that, I thought about our interview today, because I just watched it the day before yesterday. And I thought, that's the key. That's the key that I see when you come in for sex addiction help. I want to see you become your best self. What you do is still amazing. And I don't want you to stop being successful or using your talents and gifts. But I want you to become your best self. And addiction keeps you immature. And it really robs you of so much more that you could do.
I would even say, in addition to that too, there's a lot of things like addiction that we participate in that keep us immature. I mean, they just do. They're, I would say anything that we engage in with the sole purpose of distraction, which is a lot of things, those are all those, and so if you combine all of those together, how immature, in a sense, how much of life, real life, are we ignoring? I think one of the ways that so you bring up a really interesting point there, Crystal. So to me, my opinion, this is just Roland's opinion. I have no studies to lean on for this, although I have a lot of literature that would support this. But I don't believe you will be able to truly overcome this addiction. You might be sober. But I don't know if you'll ever fully recover unless you do exactly what you're talking about, Crystal. And that is, I call it legacy. I think that I don't know when it happened, but it's pretty recent. I would say if you look at the history books and you look at even some of the books that were written and the stories that were written 100 years ago, it's been dead for 100 years, but I don't know how much longer before. But there used to be this. A lot of people call it civic responsibility. There used to be this sense, and everyone had it in them. I watched. We've all seen 300, right? The movie 300 of 300 Spartan soldiers. And it's interesting. The rest of the movie is about these guys slaughtering each other, whatever. But right in the beginning of the movie, he literally looks at his wife and he says, hey, make sure that, he says this before he leaves. He's essentially knows he's going to die because he's just outnumbered. And he says, hey, make sure that when you remarry, he treats you better than I did. And he leaves. And it was really interesting for that comment, especially now through addiction and what it's, the havoc that it wreaked on my wife and I's life, and the amount of work we've had to do just to have a normal life. And then here I'm watching this movie, this full grown, mature male who is like, hey, we're not going to let someone come in here and turn our whole city into a bunch of slaves. We're not going to do that. I'm going to go die for my country. And I'm going to tell my wife that when she remarries, to marry a man better than me. I thought to myself, put me in that exact position. Would I die for my community members? I don't know if I don't think I would, to be honest with you. Would I die for the betterment of my community? I just don't think that I don't have that level of connection to my community. And then would I die and tell my wife to find someone, way better than me? And I hope that he treats her that way. Again, again, back to the point, to me, this concept of our actions matter, that our life, 100 years sounds long. It's short. There's been a lot. We are not the first people to live, and there's a lot of people. And so I know this is kind of seems like an off-topic discussion for addiction, but to me, I think one of the best ways to tap into internal motivation to recover is to understand that your actions may not be sustainable. It's just one of 500,000 views for this particular porn movie. But if you and 50 of your friends stopped, that'd be 50 less. And if their 50 of their friends stopped, it'd be 50 less. And then eventually there would be no views. And so I think there's this concept of, the strip club's full of men over there. What's the harm in me and my friends going? This video has 50,000 views. What's the harm of me watching it one more time? But I think that's the danger here is, men look at this as, I can't do this behavior anymore because it's harmful to my marriage. When I think a more powerful outlook on it was, how the heck did we get here to the point where there's so many strip clubs in this city and that they're so frequently used and that the women are going there and doing this? I mean, I think that's more of the question. And I think if you don't start asking yourself some of those more advanced questions about the sustainability of all of these practices, I always say rejecting the human back in. When everything is dehuman, you and the people on the other side of the screen or on the stage or wherever you are, it becomes really easy to do a lot of this stuff.
Mm-hmm. What you're saying there is so true. From my perspective, so I have a Christian worldview. Mm-hmm. And so from my worldview, I look at it as, people will say, I'd go to the mission field. I'd die for my faith.
Mm-hmm.
I'll do this, I'll do that. I'm like, really, would you? Just like what you were saying, I don't really know if I would. I like being a Gigi. I have a 7-year-old grandson I'm so in love with. I don't know if I would do that. But here's what I always say to people. Okay, so you're like, how often in your lifetime do you think you're going to be called to go die for God, right? Probably never. But are you living according to his principles every day? And I think that's what you're saying. And I'm saying, both of us here today is, get centered with yourself. What are you doing? What are you saying? If it's true that when we die, we're going to stand before God, right? He's going to say, what did you do with your life? What did you do with your talents, right? What if nobody else is around? I also encourage you to explore your faith. Because it answers those big questions for us, right? Mm-hmm. What happens to us when we die? What's our purpose on life? We know that we're not these bodies, right? Mm-hmm. And so you're so right. When we're talking about living in integrity, you influence one person, and this is the Christian belief. Mm-hmm. If I just can be kind or encouraging or set an example for one person, right, then that person is going to influence. Mm-hmm. So like you said, maybe we can't get everything to stop, but we could do our part. Mm-hmm. We could do our part. And that's what I think we have to do. Walking in integrity is doing the right thing, even though it's not easy or convenient at times. Yes. And when you're a high achiever and everything is at your fingertips, you can really do whatever you want to do. And so, making that shift over into accountability to say, I'm not just going to do what I want to do. I'm going to do what the right thing is to do. And when you do that long enough, that becomes what you want to do. Mm-hmm. And I think that's key in overcoming addictive behaviors, right? That addiction is real, and you can have the most discipline. You can be the highest achiever, but what's happening on the brain, right, is real. And those habits that you develop, but you can change. The neural pathways in your brain absolutely can change, and that's where habits exist. Mm-hmm. So, yes, I agree. I totally agree with you. It is that, it's the integrity part of it that really matters. It's what keeps you with your own self-worth and valuing your partner.
Mhm.
And by the way, I don't like statistics and sex addiction because I want to know, first of all, where they came from.
Exactly. Me too.
In my practice, I see a lot of people that do very well. And most of my clients not only stay sober, but they go live a fabulous
Mhm.
life, build fabulous relationships. So yeah, I
Yeah,
don't like.
people ask me that too, and they're always like, "Oh, what's the success rate of your program?" I go, it's 100% of the people who did it. The only people who ever fall off are the ones that don't do it,
Don't
and
do work.
and 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 what it is what we're talking about. It's
Mhm.
not checking the boxes is just that just doesn't work with a process addiction. You'll get a little bit more results with that with a substance addiction, but checking the boxes in a process addiction, I mean, these are your unique brain processes. Here's how I describe it for people who are really trying to grasp what it is that they need to do with sex addiction and why just checking off the boxes doesn't work. I always say with a process addiction, your processes are unique to you, completely unique to you. It's when a woman does this, it means this. Well, you could say that to me and I'd be like, I don't know, I've never thought of that. And so that's where it's your processes are unique. It's like, oh wow, if she's married, I'm really into married women because if she can send me a naked picture and she's married, then I'm better than her husband. And it's like, wow, that's a very elaborate narrative, but that's these weird processes that we have. And here's how I explain to everybody why you have to really own your recovery. Imagine a car. Imagine if every car was handmade, completely handmade. All the parts were, you built it in your backyard. You went to Home Depot and you built this car, and they're all handmade, built with all. So imagine going in to get that car repaired. This repair person would have never seen a vehicle like this ever before because it's a one of a kind. It was just constructed in that one way. He would be able to fix it, but he'd have to figure out, okay, where's the combustion happen? And then where is this? And where's the piston for this? And what spins that? And where's the different, he'd figure it out, but it would take him maybe an extra 2 or 3 or 4 weeks to figure out what was going on. That is why this addiction takes so much, I guess, participation from the addict. Is your car is very, very unique, and your therapist can help you. They want to help you. Your peers can help you, and they want to help you. And you need to do some of the work here to tell us about some of those things, because the faster we can figure out what's going on in that unique car, the faster we can go to find a solution. But I agree with you. And then the last thing I wanted to say on that you brought up was, for high achievers, they've dehumanized themselves, and a lot of them don't know what I mean by that. And what I mean is, when you abandon self, you turned yourself into a achieving machine. So at whatever, 4, 12, 16, whenever you did it, 20 years old, you said, all right, enough of feeling and emotions, enough of making mistakes, enough of being imperfect, enough of wanting to really go do this, but I'm going to do this because it makes more money and everyone says that it's more admirable. So I'm actually going to do the thing I don't want to do. You dehumanized yourself rather than listening to human drives, human, values, if you want to call them that. But the human in you gets kind of left behind and you start acting like a machine that does things. And that's scary because when you dehumanize yourself, you dehumanize others. I know a lot of high achievers are like, oh, no, I don't do that. Yeah, you do though, because if you're a machine that's for that, then so is everyone else, because that's the way. And so you will now judge other people because you're like, well, why aren't you achieving more? You're taking away the parents they had. You're taking away the traumas they might have had. You're taking away in the case of sex addiction, you remove the human in the other person. Well, now you can do anything to them. A lot of guys said, oh, I would never hire a sex worker. Yeah, but once you've dehumanized yourself so much and you've dehumanized them, they're not a person anymore. And it really opens up this, they're not a daughter, they're not a mother. And it really opens up this scary realm of, I'm not a human, they're not a human, screw it, who cares? And I think it's a dangerous place to live, and it's a sad, lonely place to live. And that's where, connecting with other addicts, that's why they say that's probably one of the most powerful things you can do in this is rehumanize yourself by any means necessary, whatever that looks like.
Well, it's so true. And isn't that where we see the narcissism show up?
Yes.
Right? Because the addict narcissistic mind says, I'm important and your only value is how you benefit me.
Mm-hmm.
Once they get healthy, they're like, oh, I'm important, but so are you. Right? They start to see that other people have worth. And you're exactly right. The reason they don't see other people have worth is because they don't see that they have worth.
Yes.
Beyond achieving what they can get, what they can do. And so
it's
that's
a tough pill to swallow. It's
Yeah.
a tough, I mean, when I saw that, because the evidence, again, you can try to deny it, but the evidence certainly points to that. And that was what I saw. I was like, okay, am I going to continue to play the game that I'm a good person, that I am all of these things, or am I going to own the fact that I've abandoned that good person who I once was, and that this whole thing is separate? And I think that's back to your point, I want to say this to everybody before we wrap up. Neither of us are telling you to not do the thing you're good at. We're not telling you to, all those things are awesome. And I would say in the way that the world's structured, you probably still need to do those things because of the way that society has been set up. And it's possible to play the game and maintain your sense of self. I own all sorts of businesses. I tell everybody they're just like brushing my teeth. I make the calls, I have the meeting, the things that I need to do, my floss, my water flosser, my teeth, I do that to keep my teeth healthy. I do the same things to keep my bank account healthy, but I don't identify in the same way. I'm not bragging to everybody about how great of a toothbrusher I am. I'm not bragging to everyone about how much of a better person I am because of all of the businesses that I own. It's that separation of, I can play the game, I want to play the game, and the fruits of playing the game are awesome, and I'm going to tend to myself. And I think what we find with recovery, the reason I believe recovery is not a burden, I think it'll be the best thing that ever happened to you, is you become you and play that. You almost gain, it's what's the Bible verse? Gain the world, lose the, it's like, there's a way to, if with intentionality, there's a way to do both. You can have the world and keep it separate from who you are, why you're here, what matters most. You don't have to sell out. And I think that's unfortunately, it's been sold to all of us as a all or none. And that's really sad, because I do think you can have both. And I don't think it's your parents' fault or your mentor's fault. I just don't think a lot of people have both. But you can. You're talking right here on this call. Crystal and I both have both. We have amazing careers where we're thriving and meaningful connections and relationships, and we're balancing all of these things. It's not easy. I've never said it was easy, but it's worth it. And I can't imagine going back to a shallow life where I'm just playing a man-made game, because I would probably become an addict again.
Yeah, so well said.
Well, thank you for your time. Where are you licensed? If somebody wanted to work with you, I can already tell you that people are going to reach out to you because you get the high achiever. I can tell just in everything that you said. You really understand the high achiever mindset and the struggle of what it's like to be in this addiction with all of the things that we have going on in our brains. Where are you licensed, and how do people find you?
I'm licensed in Florida, so I'm actually a licensed therapist and I'm a life coach, but everything falls under my Florida license. And so I have offices in Orlando and Tampa, and I also do 3-day intensives. So people fly in from all over to take my intensives. But I'm sorry, I can't see you if you're not a Florida resident. So I have a lot of clients that have Florida homes and homes other places. As long as you have a Florida residence, I can meet with you. But I love what you're doing, Roland. It's such a great, I'm referring several clients your way, because just to know that there's a place that high achievers can go to, and what you've organized and how you give them that safe place, I think is just fantastic. And so my website is my name, crystalhollenbeck.com. You can go there, text me, email me if I can be a help to you. But Keep up the great work. I love what you're doing.
Yeah, this was so wonderful. I have a feeling this will not be the last time. For everybody listening, Crystal is in the process of publishing a book. Second that is available, I will put the link to the book in the show notes for this this episode. Again, every man in my group is married right now to the love of their life. They never had any intentions of leaving this woman. They now can barely look in the mirror. I mean, it's just hard to imagine what they've now done to their wife, but that's recovery. I mean, this is a process. And the other thing I would say too is the reason she's still around is because she knows this isn't you. If she thought this was you, she left. Right. And so the fact that she's giving you the opportunity to connect with self, do not squander that opportunity. And I'll tell you this, if you take advantage of it, the future you will thank you for putting in the work.
Mm-hmm. It's so true. High achievers are incredible people at their core. And I did a survey last year for my book. My book should be coming out in a couple of months. But I did a survey, and 83.5% of the betrayed partners that took my survey stayed, chose to stay. And so most want to, most will if you'll do that work. So that's great to hear.
I say, hey, if they fell in love with you, with 10% of you, imagine how they're going to feel when they get 100%.
Yes.
Crystal, thank you so much for your time today. Let's do this again soon.